I never saw it coming. My beautiful wife, Bridget, the woman I loved more than life itself, was betraying me. I found out the hard way, walking in on her with another man in our own home. My world shattered in that moment. The rage, the humiliation, the heartbreak, it consumed me. I wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen. No, I was going to make them both pay. This is my story. A tale of love turned to vengeance, of trust broken and revenge exacted. This is how I fought back. "You know she's not being faithful to you?" Shona, my closest friend, asked. Her clear blue eyes were fixed on my face, making it hard for me to look away from her words. After she said that, I didn't know where to look. We were sitting on the back deck at her house. I felt lost for words and didn't know how to reply. Her question had surprised me. I had been enjoying a peaceful afternoon until then, but the worry in her gaze and the pain on her beautiful face told me we both understood the weight of her words. For a few moments I avoided her eyes. Finally, I looked at Shona briefly, wishing I could take back the last 30 seconds. I knew she wouldn't have said that unless she had a good reason. My shoulders felt tense, and I looked up at the cool, gray winter sky. Here in Byron Bay, Australia, it was the coldest time of year. A chilly breeze came in from the ocean as we sat on her patio, bundled up in warm sweaters, drinking hot chocolate in the late afternoon. The silence stretched as I tried to avoid looking at her while thinking about the clouds. I noticed that rain might come soon because of how the clouds were moving. I sighed and picked up my half-empty mug of hot chocolate, watching the clouds change shape while glimpses of blue sky peeked through, only to vanish again. I took a deep breath. The bright sky now felt far away from my mood. As much as I tried to focus on the weather, I couldn't escape Shona's uncomfortable words. Still holding the warm mug, I turned to look at my daughter, Maddie. She was happily pushing her half-brother Greg on the swing in Shona's backyard. A couple of minutes passed without either of us speaking. I knew Shona was waiting for me to gather my thoughts. She had sensed something was bothering me for a while, with my wife's strange excuses and hurtful comments leading me to question our relationship. The time apart, lack of closeness, and arguments had left me feeling sad and grumpy, making me retreat to the spare room more than once in recent months. But people knew I preferred love over conflict and did my best to avoid fights. It wasn't that I was weak, I just wanted to handle things differently. I would stand up for myself and others when I needed to, but when it came to my own problems, I usually put them off and hoped they would just go away. As I watched Maddie and Greg play, I let out a big sigh. I felt emotions rising in me that I had been ignoring for months. A tight feeling of stress shifted to an ache in my chest, and I swallowed hard. I looked back at Shona and noticed the worried look on her face. I knew she did not want to start any trouble, but I also felt that she was one of the few people in my life I could really count on. When I shifted my gaze back to her, words would not come to me. I watched as Shona slowly took an envelope out of her large bag, which seemed to carry everything a mom might need for her kids. "I'm sorry, but I can't find a better way to say this. Bridget is not being honest with you," she said gently. Shona held the heavy envelope for a moment, her expression mixing sadness and sympathy. With a deep breath, she placed the envelope on the table in front of her, resting her left hand on it. "It's all in here. I've thought about this all afternoon, but you need to know what's really happening. Do you want me to give it to you now or later?" I could see the pain in her eyes. She wasn't happy to share this news, and I knew it was hard for her to see my hurt. She had been my closest friend for most of my life, knowing me better than anyone else. My name is Timothy Other, but everyone calls me Tim. Until a moment ago, I thought I was happily married to Bridget. But looking at the envelope Shona had just shown me, I realized it held the truth about my marriage. Not so happy or healthy after all. Reflecting back over the past year, I couldn't point out exactly what was wrong, but I had always had my doubts about Bridget's loyalty. I sighed again, focusing on the envelope Shona was touching. I had already faced this kind of betrayal once before. We sat in silence, staring at the bad news under Shona's hand. I didn't want to believe it, but the look on her face told me that what was in that envelope would hurt. "How do you know, Shona?" I asked, my voice shaky as I fiddled with my cup of hot chocolate, which was now getting cold. "Rick," she replied simply. Rick was Shona's husband, a well-known family lawyer who had many connections in Byron Bay and even into Queensland. My relationship with Rick was complicated. We both cared deeply for Shona and would do anything to help her. Even with our past, Rick had also become a good friend over the years. We kept looking at the envelope. If what I thought was true and what was inside belonged to Shona, it could mean the end for Bridget and me. It could also mean that Rick was a better friend than I realized. Or maybe he was upset about my close friendship with his wife. A wave of worry washed over me as I stared at the envelope resting in Shona's hand. I was thinking, I can't go through this again. "Tim, you won't be alone," Shona said. She always seemed to know how I felt. I could sense she wanted to say, "this time," but held back. We both had been through a lot together. At just 25, facing a second divorce before 30 would be tough no matter what. There were long pauses in our conversation as she allowed me time to think. After a while, our silence was broken when Maddie walked in carrying 1-year-old Greg. "Mom, I think Greg needs a diaper change. He smells bad," she said, wrinkling her nose. The smell proved she was right. Maddie was 8 but acted much older and loved to tell everyone what was going on. Shona stood up, grabbed her bag, and without saying much, took Greg from Maddie's arms. She glanced at me and after a moment picked up the envelope again. She nodded at Maddie and then looked at me. I nodded back. Maddie didn't need to know what was in there. Before I knew it, Maddie settled into my lap and hugged me, giving me an air kiss just as Shona took Greg away to get him cleaned up. "Are you okay, Dad?" Maddie asked. "You look kind of worried. What were you and Mom just talking about?" She saw the expression on my face that I couldn't hide. "You're not fighting again like when I was little, are you?" The thought of fighting made her look pale. Since she could remember, her mom and I had not been a couple, but Maddie always thought we were best friends. A few years back, she asked why we weren't together if we loved each other so much. Shona and I had been explaining things as Maddie grew up, but she must have been worried after hearing a few recent stories. Shona and I had once been married. We met in the 3rd grade and quickly became best friends. Our friendship grew into dating, and before we knew it, we faced an unexpected pregnancy when we were teenagers. Our parents were shocked but still supported us. We were young and thought that getting married was the right thing to do, so we did it just after Maddie was born. Looking back, we probably shouldn't have. Shona and I were best friends, but being married to each other didn't work for us. After having Maddie and getting married, I felt love was there. We seemed like a happy young couple, but a lot of little issues built up and eventually they broke us apart. No matter how hard we tried, marriage just didn't fit us. One reason we drifted was my job. I was a software programmer and loved to game. I started my first business when I was 16. I got married and became a dad at 18 while I was working long hours, sometimes 80 to 90 hours a week. I did my best to spend time with Shona and Maddie, but it never felt like enough for her. It was all about those little things. Most people don't deal with kids and work until they're in their 20s or 30s. But Shona and I faced that when we were just 18. Our parents didn't think we would last. They made us sign a prenup before we got married. I had to because my parents were giving me money to start my business, and Shona's parents didn't want to risk their daughter's future if my business failed. The first business did okay. It didn't fail. But after 2 years, I created another business and combined the first one into it, forming Other Gaming. Now, even in my mid-20s, I have 50 employees across 3 countries. This includes programmers, testers, marketers, and admin staff. Other Gaming makes about $180 million a year, mainly through free games with options to buy extra items. Our profits are decent compared to some gaming companies, and our investors have always been happy with our results. During those early days, Shona and I loved Maddie. We were great friends, but in the end, we weren't in love with each other like true soulmates. The little things became big problems, things you can overlook when you're really in love. Without that strong connection, they just drove us apart. We were on a path to break up. With me busy at work, I wasn't around as much as I should have been, which made things worse for Shona and our relationship. But maybe the quick end helped us keep our friendship. As we fought over chores, my long hours, and taking care of Maddie, everything continued to build up between us. At work one day, I had a meeting with some investors and forgot to tell Shona. That same day, Shona didn't mention she wanted me to go to a meeting at Maddie's daycare. When I got home, she was really angry, but I didn't understand why. We argued for almost 30 minutes. In the end, Shona left the house, telling me to take care of our daughter and to make my own dinner. After that, she called some friends and ended up drinking a lot. The next morning, she woke up to find herself in the bed of a guy she had met at the bar. To her credit, Shona didn't lie to me. She came home the next day looking sad and sorry. But when she told me what she had done, it felt like my whole life was falling apart. I felt hurt and humiliated. In a moment of anger, I lashed out at her, saying hurtful things. She was shocked for a moment, but then insulted me back, calling me names that struck deep. As soon as she said those things, she realized she had gone too far. She was the one who had left and hurt me. Yet there we were, throwing insults. I had been her best friend for a long time. She knew that. "Tim, she started to say, but stopped, hands covering her mouth as if she was scared. I looked at her sadly, raised my hand, and walked away without saying anything. I moved into the spare room. For the next few months, I'm sure people in the neighborhood could hear us arguing. I was hurt, so I began the process for a divorce, saying it was because of her actions, as our agreement allowed. When she found out while I was at work, she didn't want to go to counseling like most couples. Over the next few weeks, Shona would switch between being very sorry and asking for my forgiveness, and then when I didn't respond like she wanted, she would get upset and yell at me, saying mean things about me and our life together. The only time we didn't argue was around our daughter Maddie, but even then there was still tension in the air. Eventually, both our parents stepped in. They said, "We warned you," and helped us take a good look at ourselves. One evening, I came home to find both our mothers talking to Shona quietly while she cried. My father pulled me aside and told me I needed to think things through, but he also understood my pain. After a long talk among our parents, they made us sit and listen to them. For 3 hours, they pointed out our mistakes, making us feel the weight of what we had done. When they finally left us alone to talk, Shona and I sat in silence for 15 minutes. But when we started speaking, everything else fell away, including our hurt and pain. Even though she had cheated on me and it had hurt us both, this time we talked without shouting. I believed her when she said she wouldn't have done it if she hadn't been drunk and upset. "I'm so sorry, Tim," Shona said, wiping her tears. "I never wanted to hurt you like this. I shouldn't have left that night. I should never should have done what I did," she said after taking a deep breath. "I really disrespected you, and I was foolish to take my anger at myself out on you for what I did." I gave her a sad smile. "I'm sorry too, Shona. It hurt, and it still does. You're my closest friend, and I should have forgiven you." Shona touched my cheek gently. "Thank you, Tim. But what does this mean for us?" she asked. We talked for hours, and we agreed that if we wanted to be friends and trust each other again, we could no longer be married. For the first time in months, she cried in my arms. After that, we never slept in the same bed again, but we spent a lot of time together in the days that followed. We decided that co-parenting as friends was the best choice for us. The divorce took about 18 months, and slowly Shona and I became best friends again. We moved past the bitterness of our marriage, and on the ashes of that, we found a close friendship again, slowly learning to trust each other and share our thoughts like we did when we first started dating. We shared hugs and the occasional soft kiss, but our romantic feelings faded away with the divorce. Was I sad? Yes, I still loved Shona very much, but I preferred having her as a friend in my life than risking hurting each other while being married and not able to trust. About a year after the divorce, I started dating Bridget, just a week after Maddie's 4th birthday. Bridget worked with Shona, which is how we met. She had been hinting at wanting to go out for a while once Shona and I were finished. When I didn't ask her out, Bridget decided to ask me instead. I checked with Shona to see if it was okay for me to date Bridget. She hesitated, but eventually gave me her approval, even though I could tell it hurt her. After a few dates, I often found Shona at my door with Maddie the next day, and I would end up telling her about my time with Bridget. She was a true friend and never judged me during those early days, even though I could see tears in her eyes. Within 3 months of dating Bridget, we became very close. Until then, the only thing I had known was gentle and caring moments with Shona. We always supported each other in our relationship. It was nice to see each other happy. But with Bridget, everything changed. From the first time she welcomed me into her room, I knew she was different. She was bold and adventurous in a way I had never experienced before. Bridget enjoyed things to be exciting and lively. She was expressive too, always telling me what she wanted without holding back. After about 6 months of dating, things became more relaxed and soft between us. That's when she told me she was starting to fall in love with me, much more than just being attracted to me. Bridget shared with me that around the same time Shona and I were ending our marriage, she was also leaving a long relationship that she described as intense, but not good for her. Having met her a few times before, she saw me as someone caring who would treat her well, unlike her previous partner. Bridget was short but athletic. She had strong legs and a fit body from working out. I admired her confidence and the way she carried herself. She introduced me to so many new experiences. Bridget changed me from someone unsure to someone who enjoyed being close in many different ways. However, she made it clear that she valued loyalty and wanted me to be her only partner. Soon after, Bridget moved in with me, and it made everything even better. She was fun to be around, always laughing and interested in my day. She enjoyed going out, but also liked quiet nights at home together. About a year later, Bridget started mentioning marriage. After a little time, I realized she wanted me to propose, and I did. 8 months later, we were married. It could have happened sooner, but she wanted to discuss a prenup first. My legal team insisted on it for protection, and there were some tough conversations about it. In the end, she signed the papers after our discussion with my board chair, which helped resolve the issue. While Bridget and I were busy planning our wedding, Shona was also dating someone new named Rick. As much as I wanted to dislike him, I found that I couldn't. Rick was friendly and a couple of years older than Shona and me. When I saw them together, I thought they were a good match in a way I never managed to be. Their relationship was very different from mine with Bridget. Rick and Shona took their time getting close, while Bridget and I rushed in with our feelings. When Shona noticed this, we had some big talks. We promised to discuss our jealousy about each other's partners, so we would stay close. As Bridget and I, along with Rick and Shona, became stronger as couples, everyone knew to let Shona and me be best friends. In the beginning of Rick and Shona's relationship, we almost had a big fight over a few things. Well, that's not quite right. One time, he punched me in the mouth when he saw Shona hugging me after I dropped off Maddie. By then, they were engaged, and Bridget and I were married. Shona told him to calm down since I was already married, her best friend, and Maddie's dad. If he couldn't handle it, he could leave. I was a groomsman at their wedding 6 months later. Overall, our friendships were a bit strange, but they worked. It was clear that Shona and I were very close, and with Maddie in the picture, that wouldn't change. Once Rick accepted this, we became good friends. He understood I cared for his wife in a friendly way, not more. We ended up enjoying time together on the golf course thanks to Shona. Bridget and Shona had an easy friendship too. They were not best friends, but they would hang out sometimes while Rick and I played golf or took Maddie out for fun. Now, back to the present, I leaned down and kissed my busy daughter on the cheek as she grabbed a chocolate chip from a muffin I was not really eating. "No, sweetie," I said to Maddie, trying to find the right words to explain her dad's wife without mentioning her mom's past. "Mommy and I aren't fighting. She's just talking to me about something that's going to be a bit hard," I said, searching for the right way to say it. "It's about Bridget, right?" Maddie said boldly. I looked at her in surprise. She giggled like a girl who thinks she knows everything. When she saw my expression, she said, "I knew it." "Maddie," I said seriously, "you need to respect Bridget. I understand she's not your mom, but you like Rick and he's not your dad," I explained to my daughter. She sighed again, now poking through the muffin I clearly wasn't eating. "Yeah, but Rick respects you and Mom's relationship and he really cares for Mom. Bridget doesn't like Mom or me and doesn't respect you." I sat there, a bit taken aback. I just couldn't believe I hadn't noticed it before. Bridget and I had been together for 4 years and married for almost 3. Now, with what I thought was in the envelope Shona was about to show me, along with comments from my 8-year-old daughter, everything suddenly made sense. I began to see the little signs of disrespect from Bridget that I had ignored, especially after the tough end to my marriage with Shona. I wanted this relationship to last, so I had let things go and been more understanding than I should have. I think Bridget knew it too. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Maddie was busy eating my muffin when Shona returned with Greg and a clean diaper. Shona glanced at me and asked Maddie to take Greg to play while she and I talked. Maddie started to complain, but Shona used her serious mom voice. You never argue with that voice. We watched our daughter as she led Greg back to the backyard. She's almost figured it out, Tim. Maddie is very smart and notices things that kids her age shouldn't, Shona said, watching them play. I chuckled as we watched the two of them settle in the sandpit. Maddie was digging while Greg thought it was funny to fill it back in. She gets that from you. I seem to miss so much, I said with a sigh, looking at Shona, the woman I had loved for so long. I still loved her today. In so many ways, even without knowing what was in the envelope, I felt hopeless. A moment later, Shona sat next to me and wrapped her arms around me. We both let a few tears fall. Deep down, I knew that Bridget hadn't loved me fully in a long time. There were too many things that didn't make sense. I saw the envelope peeking from Shona's bag, so I gently pulled away from her hug, reached for it, and returned to sit close to her. As I opened the envelope, Shona put a hand on mine. Tim, she said, making me look at her. What's in there will only hurt you, okay? She had already looked inside, and I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. With nothing else to do, I opened the envelope. 2 papers and a USB drive came out. The first paper was a report listing the times, dates, and places that Bridget had been watched, along with notes from conversations that were recorded on the USB drive. The drive contained audio and video recordings, making it clear that what I was reading was true. If the first document shattered my heart by revealing that Bridget was unfaithful, the second one felt like a direct blow, sending my heartbreak soaring high and shattering it even more. The second set of papers had picture after picture of Bridget with a man named Brad Houghton, who was her ex. At first, they just looked like they were having coffee. Then the pictures showed them kissing, and soon they were touching each other. The last few pictures were more upsetting, showing her in very compromising positions with him. Some photos were taken from far away, while others looked like they were taken secretly. It all felt like proof that she was cheating on me. It hurt to see her with this Brad guy, but it shattered me when I thought about the promises she made to me. She said her love was for me alone, that nobody else would take her from me. That was another promise broken, and I just couldn't accept that kind of betrayal. With a heavy sigh, I put the papers and the USB drive back in the envelope. I felt a mix of emptiness and dread, knowing it would hit me harder later. Why? I asked, feeling something deep inside me fade away. Shona didn't answer. She could tell I was in pain. Tim, she began, but then stopped. I looked at her, my oldest friend, my daughter's mother, my ex-wife, the first person who hurt me like this. What's wrong with me? I asked, my chest feeling tight. Shona looked surprised by my question. Am I so weak that the women I love have to cheat on me? As soon as I spoke, I regretted it. Shona quickly reached out, kissed my cheek, then wrapped her arms around my neck and started to cry. I just sat there, feeling the weight of betrayal. After a moment, she looked at me. Tim, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have... I stopped her. No, it's my fault, Shona, I replied sadly. I shouldn't have said that. It's not fair, and I'm sorry I compared this to what happened between us. Can you forgive me? I asked. She pulled back and gave me a weak smile, then kissed my forehead. Of course. Just then we heard another voice. Well, what's going on here? The voice said. That looked pretty cozy. We turned to see Rick, who was trying to be serious but had a smile on his face. He noticed the envelope in my hands, and his smile turned to concern. Oh, he said, taking a seat next to me and placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry, mate. I took this matter into my own hands. Shona and Maddie said things that made me worried, so I started looking into it a couple of months ago. The private investigator is someone I trust. I just got the report yesterday. He spoke softly, showing real concern. Did you look at it? I asked Rick. He shook his head. No, not in detail. I just had a quick glance from the investigator when we picked it up. He glanced at Shona. But I assume both of you have seen it? We both nodded. Rick let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. So? "What's next?" he asked. I shrugged. "Divorce." We all stayed quiet and glanced at the sandpit. Little Greg was now playing in the hole that Maddie had dug. My daughter was covering it up while Greg laughed. She looked our way every now and then, but mainly focused on Greg, knowing we were having an adult conversation. Even with the serious topic, we managed to smile. "Baby," Shona asked Rick, "is it okay for you to—" She paused. "Talk for Tim?" he finished. Shona nodded. "Yeah, I can do that." "Tim, are you okay with this?" Rick asked me in a very serious voice. I nodded. "Yeah." I handed Rick an envelope. "You'll need this." He pushed it back to me. "That's your copy. I figured you would want to keep one and have another on my desk. Prenup?" he asked. I pulled out my phone from the table, found the document quickly, and sent an email with the signed agreement from both Bridget and me to my new lawyer. I chuckled. I was emailing the husband of my ex-wife. Shona gave me a confused look. "What's that for?" "My divorce lawyer who's going to handle my cheating wife," I said. Rick smiled a lawyer smile that looked like a shark ready for a meal. "He's married to my ex-wife who technically," I made air quotes, "I divorced for cheating and for enforcing a prenup." For a moment no one spoke, and I wondered if I had said too much. Then Shona hugged me, laughing. Rick gave me a friendly slap on the back. "At least you still have a sense of humor," Rick joked. We spent the next half hour discussing my next steps. "Bridget is spending the week with her mother at the Gold Coast. She'll be gone for at least another 5 nights, I said as we planned. The look Rick gave me and the glance Shona shared with him spoke volumes. It was likely that Bridget wasn't really with her mother. "Okay," I said quietly. "I suppose I brought that on myself, but it gives me time to get things moving." Knowing my wife wasn't at her mother's added a bit more hurt, like sprinkling more bad on top of an already messy situation. After talking for a few more minutes, Maddie brought Greg back to the table as the sun began to set. About half an hour later, after a lot of hugs and kisses from my daughter, I was on my way home in my 2016 Mach 1 Mustang, painted Arctic white. This was the first new car I had ever bought, a reward for reaching $5 million in revenue. The board gave me a budget, and they were surprised when I spent less than half on the Mustang. I got home and parked as the big security gates closed behind me when I backed into the garage. The house I lived in belonged to Other Gaming and was leased to me as part of my job benefits. It was a way for me to have a nice, modern house at that time. Bridget really wanted this house. As for me, I just wanted a nice place to set up my computer and somewhere to sleep. Still, the house was nice. It had 5 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms, plus a deck where we could see the ocean far away. I turned one bedroom into my computer and gaming room. Maddie had her own room all set up for an 8-year-old, and of course Bridget and I had the big master bedroom with an ocean view. We had only lived here for 6 months, but during that time we had thrown a couple of parties and used almost every room in the house, just like any young couple would. I did wonder if Bridget had ever brought Brad here. That thought made me feel uneasy. I walked into the kitchen and tossed my bag and an envelope with details about Bridget and Brad on the counter. Then I went into the pantry and grabbed a bottle of rum. I also took out a cold can of Coke from the fridge. After pouring myself a drink, I picked up the envelope, set up my laptop, and started to look at the USB drive while reading the report more closely. As I read, I found out that Bridget and Brad had been together before she started dating me, but they had broken up just a few months before. This matched what I knew about Bridget's past relationship. We didn't talk about it much, but the private investigator confirmed that their breakup had not been good. I read on and learned that they hadn't talked until about 6 months before we got married. Even worse, it was less than 3 months after our honeymoon that my loving wife began seeing her old partner again. The report included many pages filled with their conversations. They talked about their lives together, shared stories, and made future plans. It was clear they had a full relationship. As I sat there, I went through some of their talks in detail, feeling crushed by how much I had been betrayed by Bridget. But what really struck me was a part of the report showing a conversation between them just a month ago, after they'd been together at Brad's place. I found the video that matched the transcript on the USB drive and started it up on my laptop. "But Bridget, why don't you leave Tim and come back to me?" Brad whined. "You spend almost as much time in my bed as you do in his. You know I'm better for you." Bridget laughed at that. "Brad, yes, you're bigger than Tim, but he has two things that you don't," she replied. "And what is that?" he asked, curious. "Brains and money," Bridget said plainly. Brad didn't seem to take it seriously. "It's true, Brad," Bridget explained. "Tim has a lot of money, which I can enjoy as his wife, and he's smart too. He's always been on the rise, and his company is worth a lot. That's why when Shona decided to leave him, I saw my chance. She didn't realize how much he would be worth someday." Brad scoffed. "Then why don't you just divorce him and we can both get some money?" "Brad, you're not thinking straight. Tim's lawyer made me sign a prenup. If I leave him before we've been married for 10 years, I won't get much at all. Even after 10 years, if I leave, I still get just a little bit of what he owns. What's worse is we must be careful. If Tim catches us together, I'll lose everything and I'll only have the clothes on my back," Bridget explained to Brad in a calm voice. Then she smiled, reaching out playfully. "But this way, we both get something. I get money for us to have fun, and we can be together." "But you're still with him," Brad complained. "That's because I'm his wife," Bridget replied, a bit frustrated. "Listen, Brad, honey, if I don't stay close with him, if I don't act like a good wife, we could lose everything," she said, pointing around the room. "Tim doesn't know it, but he owns this house. You wouldn't want to lose a place you're not paying for, would you?" "I guess not," Brad mumbled, looking unhappy. "But I don't like that you're with him if you don't love him." Bridget chuckled. "Oh, my poor baby. I care for Tim in some ways, but he's just a means to an end for me." Her smile grew wild, and even though the camera only caught part of her face, it sent chills down my spine as she continued. "Here's an idea. Tim and I have talked about having kids soon. What if when I stop using birth control, I have you get me pregnant and say it's Tim's? Would that make you feel better? Then when the kid turns 18, you can tell Tim the child is yours, not his, right before something happens to Tim." Brad got excited, and just moments later they were together again. I rushed to the bathroom and got sick. That night I didn't sleep well after watching the video of their conversation and a few others. I tossed and turned, my mind filled with images of Bridget and Brad together. I finally fell asleep, waking up suddenly around 8:30 when my phone rang. I fumbled to answer it. "Hello," I said, still half asleep. I heard a giggle. "Hey there, big guy. Are you sleeping in while I'm away?" My wife's cheerful voice spoke. For a moment I hesitated, unsure how to reply. Should I confront her or just act normal? Bridget picked up on my pause. "Tim, are you okay?" she asked. I couldn't tell if her worry was real or an act. Now I figured it was an act. I chose to keep quiet about what I knew. I didn't need to see Bridget, so I pushed down my feelings. Soon, everything would be out in the open. "Sorry for being late. I'm dealing with some tough issues right now," I said. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'll be back Monday night and you can tell me all about it. Maybe we can start working on that child we've talked about," my wife said cheerfully, hinting that she was likely spending the weekend with Brad. "Sure," I replied, trying to sound interested but lacking enthusiasm. "Tim?" I could hear the concern in her voice. Did she think I was on to her? "Are you okay?" I took a breath. "Yeah, Bridget, your call woke me up. I didn't sleep well. I'm just a bit off," I said, trying to sound normal. There was a pause. "Well, okay then. I'll bring you back something nice from here," she said. "Sounds good, Bridget. Have fun," I replied, trying to be a supportive husband. I heard Bridget breathe out. She must have believed me. "All right, my wonderful husband. I'll talk to you later. Love you." "Goodbye," I said, hanging up quickly. The talk about having a baby upset me. I spent the next few hours angry, thinking about her being with Brad and trying to get pregnant, all while planning to pass the child off as mine. After her last period, she made a big deal about tossing her birth control pills and said it was time to try. I was furious. The rest of the day, I did what anyone might do when feeling betrayed. I went online and cut off Bridget's access to my bank accounts. I canceled our joint credit cards and called my accountant and lawyer to remove her from my financial plans and insurance. I sent emails introducing Rick to my business team, making sure everything was organized. In a dark way, thinking about the situation made me smile. Around lunchtime, Rick and Shona came over with food. They brought hot chicken, fresh bread, fries, and salad. Maddie took Greg to her room to play while Shona prepared lunch and Rick and I talked. "Thanks for the introduction email," Rick said, looking me over with a frown. But you don't look like you had a good night's sleep. I shook my head. Not at all. I hardly slept, and when I did, the dreams. Rick nodded. So when do you want to move forward? Is Monday too soon? I explained what I had in mind. Rick smiled. No, we can do that, he said. But I'll need to leave the family here with you for a bit while I go to the office to write everything up. Are you okay with paying a little extra for this? I'm giving you a family rate, but my boss will still want me to charge for weekend work. I waved off the concern. Not a problem. I want this done fast. I spent a few hours looking at the private investigator's report and videos. What I saw and read last night made me feel sick. She is with this guy Brad this weekend to try to get pregnant. Then she plans to say the baby is mine and set me up for an accident when the kid turns 18. Rick's eyes went wide. He clearly hadn't seen the details yet. Even Shona, who sat down with a plate of sandwiches, looked worried. Are you sure? She asked. Yeah, she stopped taking the pill, and I watched the video where she got Brad to agree to this. I let my shoulders drop in despair. Don't worry, Tim. We'll make sure she doesn't come back here, Rick said. I'll also get a restraining order against both of them by Monday morning. And I'll stay here with the kids and help you pack Bridget's things, Shona added. I ate lunch, and the food made me feel a bit better. After Rick left, I went to the spare room and got some boxes we hadn't thrown out yet from our move 6 months ago. Then I brought them into the main bedroom. For the next few hours, Shona and I packed most of her clothes and her personal items. I put some of her jewelry in a bag. It was the stuff she had before we were married. I decided to keep the rest. I added a few pairs of her shoes to the boxes, but most stayed behind. I wasn't sure what to do with them. Maybe donate them to a shelter? As the afternoon moved on, I made several phone calls to sort things out. Rick called me 3 times for different details. By the last 2 calls, he seemed much more serious, and I could tell he was going through the PI's evidence. Strangely, I wasn't surprised, but felt let down that Bridget didn't try to reach out. When Rick came back with takeout Thai food, he looked upset. He hugged me and said how sorry he was for what I was going through. At that moment, I realized he was a true friend, not just my best friend's husband. I gave him a Post-it note with a 6-digit code. What's this? He asked, looking at the note. Your new code for the front gate, I said. I changed the system and gave everyone a new code, taking Bridget off the list. Great, he said. We chatted for a few more minutes before he left, giving Shona a kiss and heading off to find his son. Shona and I started to prepare dinner. Dinner was quiet, and Rick and Shona stayed the night, as well as most of Sunday, before heading home just after lunch. I spent several hours with Rick talking about divorce. When Shona and I split, there wasn't much to divide since my gaming business was just starting. Still, I made sure to support Shona and Maddie well above the required amount. But with Bridget, the feeling of betrayal ran deep and felt intentional. I wasn't going to do much for Bridget this time. I had too much to lose, and I wasn't going to let her take any of it. I had a feeling she was going to get very angry, and Shona noticed this too as we talked on Sunday morning. I don't think she ever really cared for you, Tim, Shona said, putting down the report. I'm sorry I didn't say anything before. Honestly, Bridget always felt off to me, but I couldn't quite explain why. I might be your best friend, but with everything we've been through. I nodded slowly. I thought you'd be okay. I know you cared for her and let her do what she wanted. But you let her take control of your choices, Shona said quietly, looking me in the eyes. I don't just follow orders, I replied quickly, feeling defensive. Shona laughed lightly. No, you're not like that, and that's not what I meant. I mean, you don't mind following others sometimes. I've seen that if you really don't want to do something, you go your own way. Bridget tried to use that against you in some ways. Sooner or later, it was all going to come crashing down, and I'm glad it happened before things got more serious. We talked a bit more. Then a few minutes later, Maddie came back in, holding Greg's hands above his head as he waddled around, smiling like a little kid who has everyone's attention. We kept the kids entertained for about 15 minutes before Rick went into the living room to get the kids settled with a movie. Maddie has noticed everything all along, Shona mentioned as they left the room. She has never really liked Bridget, and she doesn't allow anyone to mess with her dad. I know that for sure. Except for her mom, I joked, getting a playful punch in the arm. Tim, Shona said, and I could feel the mood in the room shift. I looked at my ex-wife and saw a sad look on her face. She sighed. "I know we've talked about this before, but I'm sorry things didn't work out for us," Shona said. "But just because it didn't work out, I hope you know that I still care about you." I nodded, finding it hard to speak. Shona continued. "You are my best friend. We made a wonderful daughter together, went through tough times and almost lost each other. But you showed your true character by treating me well when you could have done otherwise." "But Shona, I did," I started to say, but she interrupted me. "No, Tim, you didn't," she said firmly. "Sure, we fought and said hurtful things. I did things I regret, and yes, I called you names during our divorce. But you have always treated me with respect. You have never given me any reason to think you are anything but a good man." Rick came back in and sat next to Shona, wrapping his arm around her while he listened closely to what she had just said. "Shona has shared a lot about what you both went through back then," Rick added, looking thoughtful. "Tim, as a lawyer, I can trust only a few people, and you are one of them. After our fight, when Shona told me to wake up, I saw you in a new way. You were never going to take my girlfriend. You just wanted to be with your best friend and raise your daughter. Once I realized that, everything changed for me. You were honest and a good man who just wanted to do the right thing." Rick looked at me. "Tim, I heard what you said earlier. You are not a weak person. I've seen you argue with Shona about things I would never challenge her on." Shona smiled at that and nodded at me. "I've heard stories of you being tough on your team when they didn't follow your instructions. You're a strong leader, but the difference is that you go by your own rules, not what others expect. Most strong leaders worry about missing out, but you don't." "Get to your point, babe," Shona said. "You're talking like a lawyer." Rick and I both laughed. "My point," Rick said, looking at Shona, "is that, Tim, you're about to face a lot of trouble getting away from Bridget. But remember, it's not your fault. You have been a caring husband, and she has taken advantage of that. It will be her loss, not yours." After that, we relaxed a bit, and Shona offered to let Maddie stay with me this week for company. But after thinking about it, I said no. If things got messy with Bridget, I didn't want Maddie to get caught in the middle. On Monday morning, I went to the office to work with some managers on different projects. We were getting ready to launch a new game in 6 months that would use augmented reality on different devices. It was going to be exciting, but I was anxious with everything going on in my personal life. I came home in the early afternoon and started pacing, waiting for the confrontation with Bridget. A little after 4, my phone rang. "Tim, my code isn't working for the gate," Bridget said with a sweet voice. "I can't get into the house." "I know," I replied simply. "What do you mean you know?" There was a bit of worry in her tone. I took a deep breath. "I know everything, Bridget. I know about Brad, your plans to get pregnant and say the baby is mine, and the accident you're planning. I know you're not really working on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I know you're staying with Brad in an apartment that I paid for. I know how you disrespected me, and most importantly, I know you don't love me." She didn't say anything as she took it all in. I didn't wait for her to reply. "I know your code doesn't work because I took it away. You no longer live here," I said firmly. "But Tim, how can you say that? I do love you," Bridget replied, her voice overly sweet but laced with fear. "Don't forget that I was there for you when Shona left you. I took care of you and loved you for the last 4 years. How can you say such hurtful things to me?" "It's easy," I snapped into the phone, my anger showing for the first time. I looked out the window and saw her standing alone by the gate. Then I noticed some cars arriving. "Turn around, Bridget." She turned, and I heard her gasp. I could also hear the muffled talks from the phone in Bridget's hand. "Mrs. Bridget Other?" the man asked. "Yes," she answered, her voice trembling. "You've been served," he said. "In Australia, it didn't have to happen like this, but I wanted proof." He continued, "Inside this envelope is the divorce papers, the agreement between you and your husband, and a notice to leave the apartment your husband owns within 10 days. If you don't comply, he will stop any financial offers and may sue for emotional distress. There is also a restraining order effective tonight." With that, he got back into his car and drove off. He was worth the money I paid him. Bridget's next call was with an elderly woman who got out of a car. It was Marion, her mother. "Mom, Tim," she began, but was interrupted by a loud slap that echoed through the phone. "How could you?" Marion said. "I know what you've done to that poor man. I've never been so disappointed in anyone." "Mom, I don't know what Tim told you, but it's not true," Bridget insisted, touching her cheek. For a moment, I thought Marion might hit her again. Instead, she turned and headed back to her car. "Stop it, Bridget," Marion said to her. "Tim showed me some pictures. I know the truth. You have nowhere to turn, and Tim asked your father and me to take you in. I can't believe you got back together with that Brad guy. He's a loser compared to Tim," her mother said angrily. I kept listening on the line. "Tim was kind enough to move all your things to our house. If it was me, I would have thrown them away. Get in the car," her mother said, ignoring Bridget's protests. Then Bridget realized our call was still on, and she held the phone to her ear again. "Tim?" my soon-to-be ex-wife asked carefully. "Bridget?" I replied without feeling. "There's no way to fix this, is there?" she said, a mix of sadness and hope in her voice. I let out a small, humorless laugh. "Not a chance. Just follow what's written in the divorce papers and you should be fine. I'm ready to be fair about the agreement we made, but if you cross me in any way, I will make sure you lose everything, including your pride," I said firmly. I paused, and we both stayed silent for a moment. "I did love you, Bridget," I spoke softly, "but you tossed that love away. You didn't truly care for me. You just wanted my money. And Bridget," I continued, preparing for my final words. I could sense she was holding her breath. "Get a pregnancy test. If you are pregnant, we both know it's not my baby. If you are and try to say I am the father, I will make things very hard for you," I ended coldly. I heard her sob as I hung up. I must admit I felt a little better, though still empty inside. The next month was filled with ups and downs. I threw myself into work or took Maddie on outings to clear my mind. But at night, my dreams were rough, and I often woke up feeling angry. Bridget had hired a lawyer, and she was talking to Rick. Rick thought they would try to go against our agreement and ask for a 50-50 split of everything. But nothing had happened yet. I told Rick to offer $30,000 as a settlement, but they had not replied. Things took a turn that weekend. I took Maddie to the beach, and we shared ice cream while sitting outside a small fish and chip shop. These buildings looked like they came from the 80s, with their beige bricks and tin roofs. Inside, the smell of fried food filled the air. Outside, people enjoyed the sun in casual clothes, carrying towels or surfboards. After swimming and rinsing off outside, Maddie and I sat on bright plastic chairs enjoying our ice cream. The weather was cool, coming out of winter, but in Byron Bay, sunny days meant pleasant water, even if it was a bit chilly. Maddie and I were having fun, talking about riding the waves when suddenly a large arm wrapped around my neck, pulling me back off my chair while Maddie screamed. A moment later, I hit the ground, gasping for air, and barely dodged a kick that knocked the wind out of me again. "Hey, you loser, throw me out of my own place, will you? I'll show you." I looked up to see Brad Houghton standing over me, his anger clear as he spat words that made me flinch. I looked at Maddie's face, filled with fear as I was attacked. Luckily, he stepped back a moment later and pushed me to my feet. "Come on, dweeb, you couldn't make Bridget happy, and clearly couldn't please your first wife either," he mocked as I got up. He glanced at Maddie for a moment and smirked a cruel smile. "I bet this one isn't even yours, you loser." Then he came at me, a nasty look on his face. "You made me lose my home. You just couldn't keep things as they were. I was fine with Bridget still being with you. All you had to do was play your part." I tried to dodge his punch, but without any fighting experience, I took his hit on my left shoulder. It spun me around and I fell into a flower bed, hitting my head on a palm tree. I felt the skin on my forehead scrape away. I noticed Brad take a step toward me, but before he could reach me, my daughter jumped in front of him, yelling loudly, "Leave my dad alone! He hasn't done anything to you! Get away!" She paused to catch her breath, then shouted, "Help! Police! Help!" Maddie stopped suddenly when Brad, in a fit of rage, grabbed her and threw her aside like a doll. I was trying to stand, still dazed from hitting the tree. Blood was starting to drip down over my left eye, but I saw Brad throw my daughter away to get to me. Time seemed to slow down as I watched. Brad was tossing Maddie toward the street, but there was a wooden road barrier between her and the street. 3 pieces of green wood that kids sit on. In that slow-motion moment, I twisted and jumped to catch my daughter with all my strength. As I pushed off, I felt my ankle twist, but I kept moving. Maddie's face was full of fear, her body dangling in Brad's grip. I almost caught her completely. I was able to grab her just as we both neared the barrier, but I wasn't entirely successful. Maddie's shoulder was still unprotected. The way we fell caused my back, my left arm, and Maddie's right arm to hit the wooden barrier all at once. It couldn't take the force, and the whole barrier broke, sending us crashing into the side of a Toyota Land Cruiser. I lost consciousness. Later, I learned I was out for about 30 seconds. When I woke up, there was a small crowd around us. My arm was wrapped around Maddie, and she was screaming in pain, holding on to me tightly. If she wasn't screaming, she was crying "Daddy" over and over again. Brad was no longer there. One person in the crowd told me they had called for help, and both the police and an ambulance were on the way. I pushed through the pain in my back and arm and slowly sat up. I asked the older man nearby for my phone and keys that were on the table in front of me. He looked at me with a sad expression. "I'm sorry, but after you stopped that man from hurting your daughter, he stood there for a moment, then took your phone and keys and ran away." I swallowed hard and nodded. My side hurt, my arm throbbed, and even though someone had given me a towel to press against my head, I still felt a dull ache in my temples. "Could you get my daughter's bag?" I asked the man. He glanced at a younger man with him and nodded. A moment later, the younger man, who looked to be around my age, returned with Maddie's bag. I reached inside and took out her phone. I had bought it for her birthday this year. It was locked, but she could call me or her mother any time. I dialed Shona's number. She answered on the third ring. "Well, hello. Are you having fun swimming with your dad?" she asked cheerfully. "Shona," I said, wincing as another wave of pain shot through my back. "Tim?" I could feel the tension in her voice as she sensed something was wrong. "We've gotten hurt, Shona. Maddie is with me and she's being very brave," I said. Maddie looked at me, her eyes red and her face showing her pain. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. "I don't have much time. We both really hurt. The police and ambulance are coming, but I need you to call Nadine and have her track my phone. We need help fast." Nadine was my assistant. "What happened, Tim? Is Maddie okay?" I could hear the worry in her voice, a mother's concern for her child. "She's here, being the strongest girl ever," I said, smiling at my daughter, who was trying hard not to cry. "It was Brad Houghton. He hurt me and tried to push Maddie aside when she stepped in to help. We both got hurt. Can you get to the hospital? I'm not sure if they'll let us stay together, but I need you there for Maddie." "I'm on my way," I heard Shona say as she began to back her car out of the driveway. "Mummy is coming to meet us at the hospital, sweetie," I told Maddie, trying not to move too much. She nodded, biting her lip to hold back tears. Just then, an ambulance arrived and 2 paramedics jumped out. One came straight over to us while the other took out a stretcher. "Tim, are you okay?" Shona asked over the phone. "I don't know, Shona. Right now I'm focused on Maddie. The ambulance is here, so I'll see you at the hospital soon." "I'm sorry, but I have to go now. Please call Nadine and ask her to find my car. Brad has my phone and keys, and he may have taken my car," I told Tim. "Okay, Tim. I'll take care of it. Please look after our girl," he replied. "I will," I said, then ended the call. For the next 5 minutes, the ambulance crew examined Maddie. They brought a stretcher over and began checking on me, too. I hoped they could take us both in the same ambulance. They thought my daughter might have a broken arm. They complimented me for jumping in front of her. If I hadn't, she could have been hurt much worse when she hit the pine barrier. They placed Maddie on the stretcher and helped me sit on the edge of the ambulance. I might have a broken arm, and they believed at least 3 of my ribs were cracked as well. They checked my head and thought I might have a concussion based on what I and some witnesses explained about the accident. The police arrived, and while the ambulance crew loaded us up, I shared a few details. They took Maddie and me to the local hospital's emergency room. Once we got to the emergency department, doctors examined us in the same area. Maddie clung to me the whole time. About 15 minutes later, Shona came in. I felt relief as she rushed to Maddie and then gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. A few moments after that, a doctor took us both for x-rays. Maddie had a minor fracture in her right arm. They gave her some children's pain medicine and started wrapping her arm. I was in worse shape. I had a concussion, which explained the strong headache I felt, along with waves of nausea and tiredness. The x-ray showed I had 5 broken ribs and a broken arm. I would also have bad bruising on my back in a few days from the crash against the barrier. They gave me strong pain medicine and used special clips on the cut on my forehead. After that, I laid down on the hospital bed, looking at Maddie and smiling. I would go through anything to keep her safe. Shona was gazing at me, knowing what I was feeling. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "You know I'd do anything for both of you," I replied, trying to find a comfortable position. I closed my eyes, and a moment later, I felt a soft kiss on my lips. I opened my eyes to see Shona standing over me, tears shimmering. "I love you too, Tim," she said, and I smiled. Suddenly, I winced and started coughing, feeling blood. Shona screamed as a new pain grew in my side, and I started to feel faint. That was the last thing I remembered for 3 days. When I woke up, I found myself in a nicer hospital room. Rick was there, and he noticed me move. "Hey, buddy, how are you feeling?" he asked, looking at me with worry. "I feel awful. What happened? Is Maddie okay?" I said. Rick smiled. "She's fine. They put a cast on her, and she'll be back in school next week. She'll be the most popular kid after her brave dad." I tried to laugh, but felt a sharp pain in my side. Rick saw my wince. "Here, the nurse told me about this button for pain relief. You can use it if you're hurting. If you can handle it, though, try not to." I attempted a smile, but couldn't. "What happened?" Rick smiled for a moment, but then looked serious. "It's not too bad. The doctor said one of your ribs bent too much and poked your lung. You had a small procedure, but you'll be okay." Just then, a nurse and a doctor walked in. Rick stepped aside. They checked on me, told me I was healing well, changed my medicine, and then left me to talk with Rick. "Any news about that jerk, Brad?" I asked. Rick smiled and sat on the edge of my bed. He pulled out his phone. "Look at this. It's a news clip from the night you and Maddie were brought in. It was a news report from Sydney. Tonight's top story: a manhunt is on for Bradley Houghton. Earlier today, Mr. Houghton attacked local business owner Mr. Timothy Other. We now go to Byron Bay Hospital, where Mr. Other and his daughter are receiving care. Over to you, Carly." "Thanks, Sharon," said one of the local reporters, standing in front of the hospital. I recognized Carly Evans from when she had interviewed me before. "Around 11 this morning, Mr. Other was attacked by the wanted fugitive, Mr. Bradley Houghton. Witnesses say Mr. Other was enjoying ice cream with a young girl, believed to be his daughter, when Mr. Houghton grabbed him from behind and pulled him back without any reason. When Mr. Other's daughter tried to help her dad, Mr. Houghton then hurt the 8-year-old girl. Witnesses say, hurt and bleeding, Mr. Other jumped in front of his daughter to protect her from serious harm." "Carly," asked Sharon, "can you tell us how Mr. Other and his daughter are doing?" "Yes, Sharon," Carly replied. "Mr. Other is in serious but stable condition after having emergency surgery this afternoon. His daughter has minor injuries and is expected to go home tomorrow." "What else can you share?" asked Sharon from the news desk. "Sharon," Carly continued, "the police said that Mr. Houghton stole Mr. Other's phone and car and was last seen heading south towards Newcastle right after the attack. It is not clear right now if Mr. Houghton has a weapon, but the police say he might be dangerous. If you see him, call Crime Stoppers right away and stay away from him." "That's good advice, Carly," Sharon said, pausing to read a note in front of her. "Carly, do you know why Mr. Houghton may have hurt Mr. Other?" Carly looked unsure for a moment, glancing around for someone off-screen. After she seemed to get a confirmation, she read from a paper in front of her. "Yes, Sharon, I have some information." "We all hope so too, Carly," Sharon responded in her serious anchor voice. "Please keep us updated." She turned back to the camera. "Next, we have our state premier, who has been caught in another scandal, leading many voters to demand his resignation." Rick paused the news clip with a big grin. "They picked Brad up yesterday in Wollongong after he ran a red light in your car when local police spotted him." He quickly lost his smile. "Sadly, he crashed your car, but they caught him." "Don't worry about the car," I said. "I'm just glad they caught him and Maddie is safe." We talked for another 15 minutes before Maddie burst into the room, followed by Shona, who was carrying Greg. "How are you feeling, Daddy?" Maddie asked as she climbed onto my bed, her face full of worry. "I'm feeling much better, Princess. The doctors took good care of me, just like you," I replied. Maddie looked at the cast on my arm, then at her own, and she smiled. "My doctor, Mr. Sweeney, said I was very brave," Maddie said, beaming. Then she became serious again. But I told him it was my dad who was brave because you saved me. I smiled back at her. Thank you, beautiful girl. I'm sorry our day got interrupted. Once we are all better, can we try again? There are still waves out there with our names on them. This made my daughter smile, and for the next few hours we talked about our days at the beach and how much ice cream we could eat in one day. Rick took the kids for a walk and left Shona with me. You really scared us for a while, she said, holding my hand. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I replied. I know that. I'm just glad you're okay. Me too, I said. We talked for a bit, and then Bridget was found guilty as well for being part of the plan and received 5 years, but her sentence was put on hold. If she broke the law again, even for a minor offense, she would have to serve her full sentence. The judge quickly granted our divorce, saying I did not deserve to be connected to someone like my now ex-wife. Everyone was surprised when I decided to give Bridget $10,000 to help her start fresh, but I made it clear she had to leave Byron Bay to do so. While I recovered, Nadine helped me at home every day, and Shona was usually there too. If you think Nadine and I became a couple, that's not right. First, Nadine was my assistant, and it's best not to mix work with personal life. Second, she was married and nearly 60 years old, not a match for a guy in his 30s. As we worked together, I came up with a new idea after seeing Maddie in her signed cast one afternoon when she came home from school. She was staying with me almost full-time since Shona was often there too. Maddie became very protective of me. If anyone disagreed with me, even her mother, Maddie would step in and defend me fiercely. Seeing Maddie's cast gave me an idea for a promotion in 3 of our most popular games. For every pack costing over $10, we would donate $1 to charities that help kids suffering from domestic abuse. At first, my finance team was unhappy. After looking at the costs, they saw that profits were just over 30%. But after the first month, they were very happy because the money started coming in. The marketing team joined in, and Carly Evans checked on things. Our in-game sales increased by more than 300%. In the end, we donated almost $500,000 to charities in Australia, Poland, and South America. Now, every year, we hold a charity campaign to help those in need. As the months passed, Maddie and I got better. After we had the casts taken off and my ribs healed, it was midsummer and we were back at the beach. Shona and Greg were always with us, and Rick joined when he could. The few dates I went on didn't go well. There was either no connection or they seemed scared of my background, or they just wanted my money, like Bridget. I wished I could find someone like Shona with whom I shared a special bond. I was only 31, so I figured I still had plenty of time. A year passed, and I had a few brief talks with Bridget. They were quick and tense, mostly ending with me saying no. She wanted money to get back together or wanted me to forgive her. Each time I told her no and hung up the phone. What I didn't know was that my life was about to change again, but not in the way I expected. I had just turned 32, so my office, along with Shona and Nadine, planned a birthday party at my house. I decided to stay in my house after the divorce because it was lovely, and I had put a lot of effort into it. That evening, we had over 100 guests. I knew maybe half of them. There were people from work, local business people I worked with, and even Carly Evans attended, though she was told to keep it off the record. My family was there, including my parents, Bob and Tina, and Shona's parents, along with a few of Rick's family members. Everyone had enough to eat and drink, and there was music playing. As the night went on, I felt good, especially since people kept giving me fresh drinks. I had just seen Maddie laughing and running with one of my cousin's kids when I accidentally bumped into someone and quickly said sorry. "Is that all you have to say? Just sorry?" a voice called out to me. I turned to see a woman looking at me with a frown. "What did you say?" I asked her. "You heard me," she replied. "A simple sorry feels rude. Hey, stop staring and tell me where I can get away from this crowd," she said, bringing me back to our conversation. You really can't," I finally answered. "There are no smoking areas. If you want to smoke, you'll have to go out to the street." "Really?" she scoffed. "The owner is that strict?" Her tone showed she didn't like the rule. "Yes, he is," I said, taking a step closer to her. She glanced over to a quiet spot near the fence by the pool where no one was standing. "I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I just have one over there, right?" I looked where she pointed and shook my head. "No, ma'am, I really wouldn't recommend that. It's a no-smoking area and there are kids around. She looked a bit annoyed, but when I mentioned the kids, she started to put her cigarette away. Maddie walked up with her friend and little Greg following her. "Daddy said you can't smoke, lady. That means no smoking," Maddie said firmly. "This man is your father?" the woman asked me with a confused look. "Mm-hmm," Maddie replied, putting her hands on her hips. The woman stepped back a bit while Maddie, her friend, and Greg all stood with their hands on their hips, looking defiant. "And everyone listens to what my dad says. If he says no smoking, then there is no smoking," Maddie added with a hint of sass in her voice. I thought I should step in before Maddie got too fired up. Even after all this time, she still stood up for me against anyone who she thought was being rude. A year ago, Shona and I took her to see a therapist. Maddie had gotten into some fights trying to protect me, thinking I might get hurt again. I moved to face the 3 kids, but as I did, Greg thought I was stepping up to confront the woman. But the woman definitely didn't expect this. I surfaced laughing while she came up spluttering and yelling, "How could you, you little—" Then she saw little Greg and stopped. It's hard to stay mad at a 3-year-old. Instead, she turned to me, her frown getting even deeper. "And you! How can you laugh? This is not funny!" she scolded me. "Of course it is," I replied, trying to hold back my chuckles. "We fell in the pool. It's classic funny stuff. What's not to laugh at? If you don't laugh, you'll just feel sad. So lighten up." "Lighten up? Who do you think you are?" She looked at me, realizing the kids were giggling along with other people nearby. "What do you mean, lighten up?" she asked, noticing the cigarette she wanted to smoke floating on the water between us. The little bubble that formed on the water popped a moment later, making me smile at her. I looked at the woman by the pool. She seemed so upset that I couldn't help but make a joke. "Sorry, I don't know your name, but with that angry look and your need for a place to smoke away from everyone, I thought maybe you were a Karen." I watched as her face turned bright red. For a moment, I worried I had gone too far. I could almost see the pool water rise a bit with her anger. "For your information, I am not a Karen. I just wanted a place to smoke where I wouldn't bother anyone." She paused, glaring at me as she realized what I had just said. I smiled and she repeated, "I am not a Karen. My name is—" "Lily!" Rick shouted as he came closer, carrying towels with Shona by his side. "I should have known you'd be the troublemaker." Rick scowled at Lily, and I swam over to the edge of the pool. The splash from people falling in the pool had ended, and guests were returning to their conversations, still laughing. Shona giggled when she saw me come out of the water. "Well, you got in earlier than I thought. Happy birthday, Waterboy," she teased. I climbed out of the pool, took a towel from Rick and dried my hair. Then I turned to Shona and struck a silly pose. "Merman," I said, flicking the towel over my shoulder as I pretended to walk like a model. Shona burst into laughter. I heard her mention black lung and water is wet as she kept chuckling. I quickly turned, struck another pose, and shouted, "Watch me turn left." This made some people laugh, and soon Maddie and Greg joined in. Rick smiled while handing Lily a towel. "Who was that, Rick?" Lily asked, drying her hair. She still had a scowl on her face as I stopped to chat with some guests. "He was so full of himself and wouldn't let me smoke. Now everything is soaked." "That, dear cousin, was our host, the birthday boy, Tim Other," Rick said, holding Lily's bag while she wrapped herself in a towel. "You mean—" Lily stared at me in surprise. I was joking with some guests about falling into the pool, and when I caught her eye, I smiled. "Yep," Rick said, grinning. Lily groaned. "Not again." I could hear Rick laughing as I headed inside to get changed. The rest of the evening was really fun. We all laughed about the pool incident, even though little Greg got in trouble for pushing. I also talked to Maddie about getting too close to others when she doesn't have all the facts. Later that evening, I saw her go to Lily and say sorry. Shona had taken Lily inside to the bedroom that she and Rick used when they stayed at my place. Lily took a shower and Shona helped her change into some clothes. They didn't fit perfectly, but they were fine while Lily's things were in the dryer. Later that night, I was saying goodbye to Nadine, her husband, and some of my staff when I noticed Lily sitting with Rick and Shona. The kids were in the lounge watching a movie, and a few people were sitting in groups while the catering team started to clean up. I poured myself another drink and walked over to join Lily, Shona, and Rick. "So, Karen," I said, sitting down next to her, Do you do events like this or just special days like birthdays? I'm not Car. She stopped, caught herself, and smiled. Only birthdays for guys who have their kids push me into their pools. I laughed. That one's not mine, it's theirs, I said, pointing to Shona and Rick. She looked confused. But I thought they were yours. Maddie, the girl who defended me, is mine. But little Greg is Shona and Rick's. Oh, Lily said, looking at her hands for a moment. So you and Shona? Her voice trailed off with a question. Yes, Lily, Shona replied. Tim and I were married once, and Maddie is our daughter. For a moment, anger flashed across Lily's face, but it quickly changed to sadness. She looked at Shona. How do you stand being in the same room with him? Let me handle this, Rick said, looking from Shona to me. We both nodded in agreement. I think Lily needs to hear this from someone else. To explain, Lily here is my second cousin visiting from Kingscliff. She's had a tough time these last few years, and the family thought it would be good for her to take a break. She got here this afternoon, and I asked her to meet us here to get to know a few people before she stays with us for 2 weeks. Unfortunately, she didn't meet Shona or the kids before they arrived, which is why she's confused. I smiled. That made sense, but there was something more to uncover. Lily, Rick continued with a caring tone, you could say that Tim and Shona are best friends. I learned a long time ago not to feel jealous, and I trust both of them completely. He smiled at his wife with love and then glanced at me. I raised my glass to show my thanks. He sighed. I don't really understand how two people who were once married can stay friends like they do, but before you jump to conclusions, they have Maddie together, and neither of them has given me any reason to doubt their friendship. Lily looked surprised, glancing between Shona and me. Shona chuckled. I know it sounds a bit strange. Most exes can't stand each other. But Tim and I were friends before we got married. Things didn't work out, but he has always been there for Maddie and me. I care for him a lot, but it feels more like having a close brother. We both realize now that marriage was not right for us. But right after my husband, Shona glanced at Rick with a smile. Tim is the one man I trust most in this world. I just sat quietly, sipping my drink. I'd teased Shona a bit, and I suspected there was more to her story that I didn't know. I felt it was best not to interrupt now. Then something clicked in Lily's mind. She looked at me thoughtfully. A couple of years ago, that business Rick was involved in. It was on the news, right? That was you, wasn't it? I took a quick sip of my drink, thinking about how to answer. Most people either get excited or try to get closer to me when they find out what happened. I looked at Lily and chose my words carefully. Yes, that was me. That's why Maddie is so protective of me. We both got hurt in that incident, but I was injured quite badly while trying to save her. Now, whenever Maddie thinks someone is picking on me, she jumps in to protect me. She is trying to deal with the fact that I got hurt trying to help her. Her brother is only 3 and thought he was protecting his sister when he pushed you. It all just got a bit out of hand. I'm really sorry about that. Lily didn't say anything right away, but looked at me with a strange expression before nodding. Listen, I said, if you really want to step outside for a smoke, you can. With so many people around, I didn't want anyone to see that or the kids, I added, taking another sip of my drink. Again, Lily looked at me in silence. It was a shame that she seemed to have such a negative view of the world. If not for that and her smoking, she could be quite pretty. That would be nice, she started to say, but then paused, tilting her head to one side. She shook her head sadly and sighed. No, it's okay. I know it's a bad habit I picked up again recently after... Her voice trailed off, and I noticed a tear in her eye. She glanced quickly at Rick before getting up and walking away to the corner. I looked at Rick, and he gently shook his head, signaling that it was a story for another time. By the time Lily returned, it was clear she had been crying. We were deep in a conversation about a Star Wars series, The Mandalorian. Rick and Shona weren't big fans like I was, but over time they had picked up a few shows with me. One of those was about Mando, a character we all liked. I was trying to tell Rick that Mando would have to fight other Mandalorians soon over the dark saber, but Rick wasn't convinced. This is the way, Lily said out of the blue, catching us off guard. I could see a smile on her face for the first time. I realized that beneath her tough exterior, there was something beautiful. I often wondered what had hurt her so deeply. "I have spoken," I replied, quoting another character that my friends like to use. I watched as Lily struggled not to smile, but she couldn't hold it back when Rick and Shona laughed. Lily blushed, and I thought maybe she felt a bit more comfortable. "Are you a Star Wars fan?" I asked Lily, who seemed a little different from us. "More of a general sci-fi fan," Lily said. I didn't even need to turn to see the look Shona was giving me. I just ignored it. Around midnight, the last guests left, leaving just 4 of us and the kids asleep on the couches inside. After a few drinks, I put Shona and Rick in their usual room with little Greg. Maddie went to her room and Lily got the guest room. That night, as I fell asleep, I thought about how beautiful Lily. It was too bad she smoked. Over the next couple of days, we all spent time at my house. Shona, Rick, and Lily all hung out together. We went to the beach, swam in the waves, built sand castles, and enjoyed fish and chips. Once you got past her attitude and the fact that she wanted to smoke, Lily was nice. "So, what's your story, Lily?" I asked one afternoon while we watched Shona with Maddie and Rick with Greg in the pool. After a couple of drinks, I blurted out my question. Lily shot me a glare. "It's none of your business," she snapped back. I raised my hands to show I meant no harm. "Sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. I just thought I'd ask because, while you keep talking about needing a smoke, you never seem to have one. It seems like you're working through something," I said. "You know a bit about my past, so you know I've been there too." Lily looked at me, upset at first, then let out a sigh. She tried to start. "Take your time, we have all afternoon and they're busy," I told her gently. She took a deep breath as if making a decision. "I lost a baby," she said, her voice sad. I was taken aback. The confession shocked me. Lily briefly looked at me before staring down at her glass of red wine that she was slowly sipping. "It was about 6 months ago," she began, sharing her painful memory. "I had been with my boyfriend for a little over 6 months when I found out I was pregnant, even though we were using protection. When she looked at me, I stayed quiet but nodded to show I was listening. At first, I was a bit worried. We were both so young. But within a week, I started to feel happy about it. My boyfriend, Aaron, though, wasn't as excited." She paused. "Anyway, we argued a lot, and when I began to show, Aaron started coming home late and drunk." Lily took a deep breath, her eyes getting watery. "One night, he came home really drunk, and I told him he needed to be more responsible because he was going to be a dad." She glanced at me again. I tried to stay still, not wanting to interrupt her story. "We fought for almost 2 hours. He was drunk and I was really upset. I needed him to be sober and supportive while I was pregnant." Lily took a moment to gather herself. "I've only told 2 people this part," she said quietly. "One was the police officer who talked to me, and the other was the doctor who helped me later. I don't know why, but I trust you, Mr. Other." I nodded slightly to show I understood. "We didn't know at the time, but our neighbors called the police because of our shouting. When we heard the sirens, Aaron, in his drunken state, thought I called them. He pushed me down and then—" Lily couldn't finish. I reached out and placed my hand on her arm. She gave me a sad smile and the pain in her eyes was clear. "I'm really sorry, Lily," I said gently as she tried to hold back tears. "Thank you," she replied, taking a deep breath. "A couple of days later, I lost the baby. I had to have surgery because it was dangerous for me. I like to think she was a little girl, just like your Maddie, full of life and so beautiful." She took a tissue from her bag to wipe her eyes and then handed me one. I realized I was also misty-eyed. After a moment, we both felt a little better. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Shona looking at us, but she kept Rick and the kids busy. "Anyway," Lily said again, "I fell into a deep sadness after losing my baby. They put me on antidepressants and some hormone treatments, most of which I've finished now. But as you might have seen, I can be a bit outspoken sometimes." I laughed and Lily joined in. I was glad she wasn't offended. A little laugh felt nice in such a heavy moment. "And let me guess, you started smoking again as a way to cope?" I asked, trying to keep the mood light. Lily smiled and nodded. "My friends and I used to smoke during college. I know it's not a good habit, but it helps me forget my worries," she explained, sounding like she was done sharing. "Lily, can I give you a hug?" I asked. She looked at me sharply, and I acted innocent. "I just thought since the police and the doctor know everything, they probably wouldn't hug you." Her glare disappeared, and Lily stood up. She came around the table, holding out her hands for comfort, just like Maddie does. I wrapped my arms around her. At first, she felt tense, but then she relaxed and held onto me tightly, like a dam bursting. Lily cried hard into my chest. I glanced over at the pool and saw Shona and Rick watching us, with Rick looking worried. I shook my head slightly, and Shona pulled Rick away to keep the kids busy. I led Lily to a quiet lounge not far from everyone else. We sat down, and she kept crying, her head on my chest and her hands gripping my arms. Not sure what to say, I just stayed quiet and held her tight, like I would if it were my daughter upset. About 10 minutes later, Shona and Rick brought the kids inside. I smiled as they tried to tiptoe by us quietly. Shona looked at me with a question in her eyes, and I mouthed the word tissues to her. A little while later, Shona returned with a box of tissues and a pitcher of water with 2 glasses. She set them down and went back inside. Seeing the tissues seemed to help Lily a bit. She looked at the pool, then back at me, and then at the tissues and water. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her mascara had smudged. I picked up a tissue to wipe her tears, then poured her a glass of water and handed it to her. "Here," I said softly. She took a sip of the water quietly and settled back into my arms. "Are you okay?" I asked. Lily shook her head, then looked up at me and nodded. "Yes, thank you. I didn't realize I needed that." I smiled. "It's all right. When I divorced Bridget, Shona helped me a lot too. I probably had worse makeup than you." Lily giggled, looking at the tissue in her hands. "She must mean a lot to you, huh?" "Shona, I mean. She's my best friend, always has been. Shona and I have been through so much together. Whenever I really needed help, she was there," I replied. "Even during your divorce?" Lily asked, trying to understand my past. I nodded. "Even then. We had a lot of arguing, but although we have Maddie now, we really shouldn't have gotten married. In the middle of everything, I realized I was better with her than without her, just not married to her." "What about your other wife, Bridget?" Lily asked. I took a deep breath. "I hate to say it, but I married Bridget too quickly. If I had thought about it clearly, I wouldn't have done it. Bridget was not faithful to me for a long time. I thought I loved her, but really I see now that she never cared for me. I was just someone to support her." Lily looked up at me. "I'm sorry to hear that, Tim. Even though I may have seemed unfriendly when we first met, I can see you are a kind man. Bridget made a mistake. Any woman would be lucky to have you." I raised an eyebrow. "Any woman?" I asked. Lily nodded. "Yes, if only I could be so—" She didn't finish her thought. Instead, I leaned in and kissed her. For a brief moment, her eyes widened in surprise. Then she closed them, and I felt the strong, troubled woman soften against me. This time, it was not just for comfort, but for attraction. When we pulled back, we both smiled at each other, and Lily took my hand. "That was surprising," she said with a smile. I frowned, and she noticed. "But not unwanted," she quickly added. "This is how it should be," I said, repeating my earlier words. Lily giggled. For the next hour, as the sun went down, Lily and I talked. We shared the pain of our past relationships. She told me her ex is in prison for many crimes, including hurting others and drunk driving. The night he hurt her, he had driven home while seriously over the legal alcohol limit. Prison is the right place for him. By the time the sun set and the lights turned on, Shona and the kids came out, followed by Rick, who brought a pizza from Mama's. It was fresh and warm, with homemade sauce, mozzarella, and basil on a traditional wood-fired crust. The conversation was a bit tense at first, but Lily quickly explained to Shona and Rick that we had been discussing some tough times in our past. She didn't share too many details, but said enough to satisfy Shona's curiosity. I knew Shona would ask me more later. After dinner, we all went back inside. Maddie was with me this week, while Shona and Rick were taking Greg and Lily home. The hug that Lily and I shared was a bit awkward, but held a warmth that Shona and Rick clearly noticed. As Maddie and I got ready for bed, she picked up on it too. "Dad," my daughter started in that tone that told me she wanted to have a serious talk. I sat on the end of her bed as she brushed her hair. "You like her, don't you?" my thoughtful daughter asked. "I think so, Maddie. She has been through a lot, maybe even more than us. But we've only known her for a couple of days. Let's take our time. We don't want another Bridget in our lives, do we?" Maddie laughed a little. I don't think Lily is anything like that person. I didn't like her choice of words. Maddie saw that. Sorry, Dad, I meant that unkind woman. I chuckled. Maddie was growing up fast. In a few years, boys would be around, and then we'd have to be careful. It's okay, Maddie. Bridget was not nice. Maddie and I shared a smile. But please, choose your words wisely. As for Lily, who knows? What do you think of her? Maddie bit her lip for a moment, brushing her dark blonde hair. You're right, Dad. She is not like Bridget. Mom and I were watching you two this afternoon. Oh, you were you? I asked with a grin, and Maddie turned slightly red. I think she likes you, Dad, a lot. Mom and I can tell. I don't get the strange feeling I had with Bridget, but she seems hurt too. We can all see that. That's true. She has been through a lot recently, and none of it was her fault, I explained to my daughter. Like what? Maddie wanted to know. I can't tell you, sweetheart. Lily shared it with me in confidence, and I won't break that trust. I thought Maddie might push back, but she simply nodded. We turned our attention back to school and homework, doing what parents often do, helping their kids prepare for the school week. Later, I was in my study looking through emails and planning my week when Shona called. I don't know what you said or did, but that woman is totally into you, Shona said, sounding a bit stern. Well, hello to you too, I laughed, switching to my Bluetooth headset and bringing up our work schedule for the next month. While Shona spoke, I started rearranging tasks for our team to review next week. I'm serious, Tim, Shona said in a secretive voice. Lily has not stopped talking about how great you are from the moment she left until now when I called you. Rick says he has never seen her so taken with someone. Apparently, her old boyfriend was not good to her, and it ended badly. That's true, I confirmed quietly. There was a pause, and I could sense Shona thinking. She shared everything with you, didn't she? She asked. Yes, she did, I replied. Shona, Maddie asked me about this earlier, and I'll tell you the same thing. Lily has faced challenges that make our problems seem small. But she told me all this in confidence, so even though you're my best friend and I care about you, I can't share more. Again, Shona was quiet while I focused on the screens in front of me. So, you like her too? She asked simply after a moment. I stopped looking at the screens and turned to the window of my study. It was dark outside and not much was visible. In the distance, you could see container ships moving slowly, their lights twinkling as they swayed gently on the water. Yeah, I like her. She's smart, funny, like sci-fi, and doesn't mind that I'm a geek, I said, and Shona chuckled. And don't forget, she's stunning, Shona added. I hadn't really noticed, I replied, trying to keep a straight face. We both laughed for a moment, teasing each other. Seriously, Tim, Shona said as we returned to the important topic. She seems to like you more than just a casual interest. She often asks about you and even about Maddie. I think she's a bit concerned about us. I chuckled. She doesn't need to worry. If something is really there, and talking with Lily today, Maddie earlier, and now you, I'm starting to believe there's a chance for me after Bridget. There will be, Tim, Shona said firmly. Are you okay if I step in to help you? As your first love and best friend, I have insights that could either help or scare her off. I could imagine Shona raising her eyebrow. I thought for a moment. Lily was everything we talked about and more. She seemed like a lovely person, but worried that others were against her. Loyalty was not a problem, but love. Sure, Shona, I said. I'm not sure where it will lead, but go ahead. For 3 days after that, I didn't hear from Lily or Shona. Maddie was oddly quiet, glancing at me during dinner as if something was up. I just focused on work and let my geek side take over. On Wednesday evening, I came home from the office and found Maddie, Shona, and Lily all in my living room. Shona and Lily had glasses of wine, and I could smell a delicious sauce and bacon coming from the kitchen. I greeted the ladies and stepped into my office for a few minutes to prepare my work for the evening after Maddie went to bed. I wasn't sure where things stood with Lily, so I thought it best to stay calm. Tim, Lily said as she entered my office, dinner will be on the... But then she paused, her eyes growing wide as she looked around. She noticed my computer setup, which had multiple screens. It was your typical tech setup, but what caught her attention were the posters and awards on the wall. For nearly 2 minutes, Lily walked over and looked at the posters and the framed awards next to them. It was impressive that I had a picture for each successful game, along with a frame for every award they had won. It reminded me of everything I had created with other gaming, and I felt a bit proud to see it there. In my office, we had awards in frames on the wall, but here in my private space, I like to see the games I made. "I know this game," Lily said, pointing to one of the posters. "I spent a lot of money on the extra packs. It was a really good game." Then she looked at another poster. "This one too. I spent hours trying to get better at it." She noticed another game and took out her phone to show me that she had it. "This one helped me when I was in the hospital. I loved the puzzles. When things were tough, I lost myself in these games." "Why do you have them on your wall, Tim? I know you work in programming. Do you work for the company that makes these games?" she asked. "Open up Puzzle Build and check the bottom right of the loading screen," I suggested, remembering the game she was talking about. She did, and her eyes grew wide. "Other gaming, that's you?" I nodded. "Years ago, I started Other Gaming, and all these games are my work." "You mean you design them and own the company?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. I smiled. "I've been doing this since I was 19. "So when you told me that Bridget was after your money," she started. I chuckled again. "Yeah, I have a bit more than most, but honestly, most of it is invested in the business." "Okay," she said, her expression changing a little. "I just came to tell you that dinner is ready. Dinner was fantastic. Maddie and Shona had let Lily in, and she used my kitchen to make a wonderful fettuccine carbonara with grilled garlic bread, finishing with vanilla ice cream. By the end of the meal, everyone was very full. Shona was watching Lily closely, but Lily looked a bit down, even with all the compliments we were giving her. Afterwards, Shona went with Maddie to help her get ready for bed, hinting that I should talk to Lily. I poured us both a little glass of sweet local dessert wine that tasted great with the ice cream, and we sat down in the lounge. "Are you okay, Lily? That dinner was amazing, but you didn't seem to enjoy it as much. Did we say something wrong?" I asked. "No," Lily said quickly. "No, it was great, She sighed, leaning back against the couch, looking a bit deflated. "Tim," Lily said softly, a hint of sadness in her voice. "Have you ever found yourself hoping that you could finally rise above all the troubles, thinking you might find something real to hold on to? But then, in a flash of understanding, you realize it's never going to happen, that the distance is just too great?" I looked at Lily for a moment, unsure of what she meant, but I guessed it was about the serious talks we'd had about her past. I took a sip of my drink. "I guess in some ways my breakup with Bridget felt like that. I did love her, and when I learned the truth, it shattered something inside me, leaving a void that still feels empty. I don't know how to fix it, but I know I have to. That's the gap I'm trying to cross. Does that make sense?" I asked her. Lily nodded. "In some ways, yes." She gazed at me. "Tim, you're my gap." I chuckled, not sure if that was the right response, judging by the look she gave me. "Sorry, I don't understand. How am I that gap for you?" "Tim, I think we both know there's something between us. I mean, that kiss," Lily said, smiling and blushing as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I smiled back. It was pretty great. For a moment she lit up, but then her expression darkened and she looked sad. "Over the past week, I've spent time with Shona and Maddie, and I've been cared for by Rick. I've come to know you, the guy whose kids pushed me into the pool at his birthday party just because I wanted a smoke," she said, grinning, and I couldn't help but laugh too. "And that kiss. Oh my goodness, Tim, I've never felt anything like that from just a kiss. I never wanted it to end." As she spoke, I smiled at her and placed my hand on hers, but she pulled her hand away, leaving me confused. "But tonight, I saw in your study that you're a gap I can't cross. I can't be that," she said. "Be what?" I asked, puzzled. "Tim, I'm just an ordinary person. I work in admin for the local council, and I feel like I don't fit into the social world you're part of." Lily looked at me, tears welling in her eyes, her heart seeming to break. "I earn just under $60,000 a year, and I won't become a gold digger." Her voice trembled as she fought back tears. "Sometimes I can be clueless. This woman was sharing her heart with me, thinking that my money would make her seem like she was just after my wealth, like Bridget. She had been through so much pain, and yet she chose to open up to me. Suddenly, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Lily, come with me." I stood up, took her hand, and led her outside. As we walked together, I could feel her hope as her fingers gripped mine tightly along the path. The moon was bright as we strolled past the pool. Then, without warning, I scooped her up, held her close, and we both jumped into the pool, fully clothed. As we went under the water, I let go of Lily and we both came back up. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. I pulled back and looked into her eyes. Lily, I don't care about your past. I don't see you as someone broken. To me, you're beautiful and talented. You cared enough to cook a wonderful meal tonight. And I have a feeling that Shona and my daughter noticed that you liked me and encouraged you to talk to me, right? She nodded, still holding on to me. If Shona or Maddie thought you were just after my money, you would not have been able to be close to me tonight or talk with me this week. They see something special in you. If you want, I would love to date you and see where this goes. Lily kissed me again. Okay, but only if you promise not to throw me into pools again when you want my attention. I laughed. Sorry, but I can't promise that. Well, next time, at least let me get ready first, she joked with a teasing look. I felt my heart race a little, but we were interrupted when we heard the door open. If you need them, I'm leaving some towels here, Shona said as she came in. Maddie is in bed and will turn off her light soon, so you two will have some time alone. I'm heading home now, she added, smiling as she put the towels on the table. Shona then sat down nearby and smiled at Lily and me. I care about him, Lily, Shona said with a serious tone. I care about him like a sister would. There is no one more important to me than the man you're holding. I want to tell you this once. Treat him well and don't take advantage of him. He deserves love for being the amazing person he is. He will always have friends and family around him, but he needs someone special, someone who will cherish his heart. I believe you could be that person, Lily. But remember, if you hurt him, I will protect him, no matter what. Bridget is just starting to understand that. I surprised her by collapsing right into her arms and giving her a kiss. I haven't. I chuckled. It's all right, I don't mind, as long as I can return the favor later. You mean you would? Really? She looked at me wide-eyed. What, haven't you ever had a guy be nice like that? Lily shook her head. I've only been with 2 other guys before you, and asking either of them something like that would not have gone well for me. I smiled. Then let's change that. You're coming to my room right now. With that, I helped Lily out of the pool. We wrapped up in towels and grabbed our wet clothes, tossing them into the laundry. Hand in hand, I led Lily up to my room. As we passed Maddie's room, I heard her say, "Good night, Dad. Good night, Lily," with a playful tone. I laughed and replied good night. Lily echoed me, looking a little shy. Once in my room, I closed and locked the door. I took Lily into my bathroom. Lily had lovely red hair, pale skin, and cute freckles all over. I was thrilled to make her feel cherished. After I dried both of us off, I led her to my big bed, where I showed her what it meant to be cared for. Soon, Lily was cuddled up to me, and I could see she felt safe. "I love your pool," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. I kissed her, and we drifted off to sleep. The following month was wonderful. Lily quickly became a big part of my life. We made sure to go out for dates, enjoy time outside, and then come home to spend lots of time together at night. More than once we got up late, and I faced a playful scolding from Nadine for missing our morning meeting. However, I think she knew something was up because she always smiled when I got in trouble. Lily applied for a job with the local council doing office work like she did in Kingscliff. She was worried she wouldn't fit in, but that worry was not needed. Being a nerd, I tried to avoid the flashy things. The first time I had to travel was just for one night in Sydney. Lily almost panicked. It had been months since that first night in the pool, and she worried if I wasn't home by midnight. Being a nerd, that often happened. Travel and not being at home reminded me of when I was lonely. In the end, I asked her to take a day off and brought her to Sydney with me. I went to my meetings and she did a great job of impressing one of my board members as my girlfriend. After about 3 months, we said "I love you" for the first time after she pushed me in the pool before dinner. It seemed falling into the pool would be a regular thing for us. A year later, I proposed, and I don't think I've ever seen Maddie and Shona so happy. We had our wedding on a Saturday afternoon in the backyard. Rick was my best man and Shona was the maid of honor. When we said "I do," and our officiant said we could kiss, the photographer was ready as Rick and Shona gave us a little push, right into the pool. The photos turned out beautiful, capturing our smiles as we fell into the water together. For our honeymoon, we went to Europe and spent nearly a month traveling and sightseeing in several countries. Lily and I realized we fit well together. Sure, we disagreed sometimes, but we talked things through once we were calm. I noticed she could get jealous, but the only women who could talk to me without bothering her were Shona, Maddie, and Nadine. Anyone else would quickly find themselves facing an angry redhead. If I ever worried about being faithful because of my 2 previous marriages, 2 events around our first wedding anniversary put those worries to rest. The first event was one of the rare nights when Shona and Lily went out together with a few other women, some married and some single. They went to a local club. All the women danced together, and while the singles often danced with single guys, neither Shona nor Lily danced with any men. Shona called me 2 nights later to tell me about it. "Seriously, Tim, you can't blame Lily. She did nothing wrong," she said, as Lily was on the phone with our lawyer. "I went to the bathroom for just a moment, and then security told me that 2 guys started bothering her. When they wouldn't take no for an answer, one of the men grabbed her and tried to pull her out of the bar in front of her 2 friends still sitting at the table. Lily let the guy lift her up but then pushed him away and kicked him where it hurt. The second guy grabbed her, but she elbowed him in the stomach. As he bent over, she swung her handbag and hit him on the side of the head, shouting again and again that she was a married woman and her body was only for her husband. She told them to leave and that they could just go away and leave her alone." Shona looked amused as she told me this. In court, the charges didn't go far when the security video from the bar was shown. Instead, the judge gave the 2 men a 6-month suspended sentence and warned them that no means no. The second incident happened about a month after our first wedding anniversary. We spent that anniversary camping on Fraser Island in Queensland, right on the beach. I understood why the locals called it white pointers after that week, as Lily hardly ever wore a top while we played in the waves. But back to the second incident. About a month later, Lily had a visit from Bridget. It took Lily just a minute to feel that something was off. I had never shown her a picture of Bridget, nor did I really describe her. But as we relaxed by the pool with Rick and Shona on the other side, and Maddie and Greg swimming and playing with pool toys, Lily told us about her meeting. "I wasn't expecting it. I just had a meeting with a B. Brown. When she walked in and sat down, I said hello, but she just stared at me," Lily said, looking innocent. "I felt really uneasy as she looked at me. But true to her reputation, Bridget didn't disappoint." Lily continued to share the story about my ex-wife. "I can see why he likes you. You're much prettier than he said," the woman told Lily. Lily blushed, thinking she meant me. "Thank you, Miss Brown. I believe my husband Tim finds me attractive," Lily replied. At that point, the woman frowned but then smiled, though it didn't seem friendly. "Oh, I didn't mean Tim. I was talking about Aaron," she said. Lily gasped. "What? Why would you mention Aaron? How do you know him?" she asked, now worried about who this woman was. The woman's smile grew wider, looking quite devious. "Oh, Aaron and I know a lot about you. We've been keeping an eye on you for some time." After he got out of jail, the woman smiled at my wife and said, "I came to get him back for you." Lily felt uneasy. Aaron was the part of her past that still troubled her. "Why would you do that? I'm married now," my wife replied, her cheeks turning red. "I know, pretty redhead, but you're in my way," the woman snapped, dropping her kind act. "Your way?" Lily asked, still feeling a bit shaken. The woman stood up. "Yes, my way. I was with him before you, and I want my husband back." Lily's worry quickly turned into anger. She realized she was no longer frightened. She was facing the woman who had hurt her family. "Bridget," was all she said. Bridget replied, "Yes, I am. Tim is my husband. I know I made mistakes before, but I will win him back. He liked me better. I'm not as broken as you are." For a moment, Lily felt the urge to fight back, but she held her ground. Instead of responding, she got up, grabbed her bag, and started to leave. But Bridget had other ideas. As Lily walked towards the door, Bridget pulled her back by her hair. "I'm not finished with you," Bridget shouted in front of everyone in the cafe. "You're going to leave Tim and run back to Aaron. I will get back together with Tim and have his kids, so he and his money will always be mine." Bridget tried to spin Lily around, but she didn't see Lily's punch coming. In one quick move, Lily threw a punch that caught Bridget off guard. The hit made Bridget stagger, and she let go of Lily's hair. Quickly, Lily tripped Bridget, bringing her down and holding her arm behind her back. "Someone call the police," Lily told the people in the cafe. "Someone said they had already done it." Lily leaned in close to Bridget, almost whispering, as she held her down. "Listen, Bridget, you had your chance. You can't just take him away. If you tried, Shona would make sure you were gone," she warned. Bridget felt weak at the mention of Shona's name, and I wouldn't mind helping her. "But I am with him, not the other way around. By the way, I meant to tell him tonight, but I'll let you know first. Tim is going to be a father again. I just found out this morning." Bridget groaned. "And knowing how Tim is so good at making things happen, I wouldn't be shocked if there were 2 babies on the way." After that, the police arrived, and Bridget was quickly arrested. Lily was questioned, but everyone saw that Lily only acted in self-defense when she stopped Bridget. When Lily finished her story, she apologized for telling Bridget before she told me about the pregnancy. I laughed and said it was okay. I was just happy that my wife and our future kids were safe. Bridget was let go the next day, but got a restraining order against Lily, Maddie, Shona, Rick, Greg, and me. We never saw her again, but a few years later, we heard she married a man involved in illegal activities up on the Gold Coast. It didn't last long, and she ended up in trouble with the law again. We also found out that Lily wasn't having twins. It was triplets. It was 3 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday when Lily went into labor. Connor, Adam, and their sister Jessie were delivered by C-section less than 2 hours later. The doctors wanted to avoid any problems since there were 3 babies. I was in the operating room with Lily, supporting her the whole time. She was so strong, and my love for her grew even more. I took 3 months off work to help out, along with a live-in nanny, Maddie, who was always around, and of course, Shona, Rick, and little Greg, who was not so little anymore. It took some time to find our routine. Lily was always busy feeding the babies, and her body was changing too. With 3 hungry babies, she had her hands full. I changed diapers, and I had forgotten how bad the early ones could be. 3 times as many meant our house smelled a bit funny for a while. But like everything, we kept going. Lily and I had some disagreements when we were tired. I remember one time I walked out to cool off at Shona and Rick's place, but we always found our way back to each other. That night, after all the kids were asleep, we shared a very special moment. Now our triplets are 3 years old, and it's another Saturday afternoon by the pool at our home. Just 15 minutes ago, I playfully tossed Lily into the pool because she made a joke asking why I wasn't more like a character from Star Trek who was known for charming women. She got me back by pulling me in with her, and we laughed and shared a kiss. The kids loved it, and soon our whole family was in the pool, having a great time. After a while, Lily and I got out and joined Shona and Rick. Shona was still my best friend, and I couldn't have made it through everything without her support. A couple of years later, Lily and I talked with Shona and Rick about Lily's past. Rick didn't know everything, and this brought us all closer together. On a lazy Saturday afternoon, Shona brought out a deck of cards while the kids played nearby. The adults got ready to play. "She's not being honest with you," Shona whispered to me while we both watched Lily from across the table. For a moment, I felt worried. The last time Shona said something like that, it upset me a lot. But this time I smiled. "I know," I whispered back, and Lily smiled at me. I looked over at the big mirrored doors that showed my cards. The angle was just right for Lily to see what I had. "He knows how to play it safe, Shona," Lily said with a grin as she placed her next cards down. "He knows that if I win now, he wins later," she said, giving me a knowing look. And to answer the question, yes, I did win later, 2 times actually, but that's a story for another day.